on Goblin Reddit. Today's story is...
My wife demanded a baby for years, but when our son was born she completely rejected him. 8 months after the divorce, she called me drunk with an unforgivable request. 8 months ago Zoe and I ended our marriage. It wasn't just a normal separation. It was messy, full of bitterness and constant arguments. During that time Zoe stayed at home as a mother looking after our son Jason. When we first got married, we both shared that beautiful dream of starting a family. We were eager to have children and we thought it would happen naturally, but life had other plans for us. Conceiving turned out to be much more complicated than we had anticipated, and that difficulty deeply affected Zoe. She carried an intense feeling of guilt, feeling that she was failing us because she couldn't get pregnant right away. It didn't matter how many times I assured her that it wasn't her fault or how often I reminded her that we had all the time in the world to achieve it. Zoe became obsessed with solving this situation as if it were a puzzle that she could decipher with the right formula. She immersed herself completely in researching ways to improve fertility. She tried every home remedy she could find, read countless articles and even made drastic changes to her diet. She also made me modify my diet, eliminating certain foods and adding others that she swore would help with my sperm count and sexual desire. Every day she seemed to have a new plan or routine she wanted us to follow, and her determination was relentless. At first I tried to be understanding. I wanted to make her feel better and show her that we were in this together. But after a while it became overwhelming. The constant focus on getting pregnant felt completely absorbing and I began to feel exhausted. Although I wanted to have a child, I believed that we needed to take our time and let things happen naturally. However, Zoe didn't like my more relaxed approach. She interpreted it as a lack of interest on my part, which only created more tension between us. We argued frequently, with her accusing me of not wanting a baby as much as she did, although that wasn't true at all. Finally, after weeks and weeks of trying, we received the news we had been waiting for. Zoe was pregnant. I felt on top of the world and thought that this would finally bring her some peace of mind and allow her to relax. But instead of calming down, she became even more obsessive. Her focus shifted from getting pregnant to making sure that everything about the pregnancy was perfect. After Zoe became pregnant, her stress level seemed to skyrocket. Every hour of every day she obsessed over ensuring that the pregnancy was as safe and perfect as possible. She devoured book after book on pregnancy and parenting, especially those aimed at first-time mothers. At first he admired her dedication, but it wasn't long before her fears often became irrational. She worried about things that seemed far-fetched or improbable. But in her mind they were very real threats. I did my best to reassure her, to assure her that everything would be fine. But I also tried to remind myself that she wasn't acting this way to be difficult. She was scared. She desperately wanted to be a good mother and do everything right, and I could see how much pressure she was putting on herself. Then, approximately 4 months after becoming pregnant, Zoe made a decision that completely surprised me. She quit her job without even consulting me first. This was not a small choice, it was a huge decision that altered our lives and affected us both. At the time we had a mortgage, student loans and many other bills to manage. My salary was decent and we managed, but it wasn't enough to leave much room for extras once all the basic needs were paid for. Losing her income added a lot of stress to our finances, and what frustrated me the most was that she didn't think to consult me before making such an important move. Suddenly I felt like I was carrying the whole weight on my own and, although I understood that she wanted to focus on the pregnancy, I really wished she had talked to me first. When Zoe became a stay-at-home mom, I thought maybe this would help her relax. I thought she wouldn't have to deal with the stress of work anymore and could focus on herself and the baby, but things didn't get better. If anything, her anxiety seemed to get worse every day. There was a new worry, a new fear, or something that didn't go the way she wanted it to. At this point, I suggested she see a therapist to help her process her feelings and relieve some of the pressure she was putting on herself, but she refused. She didn't want to talk to anyone about what was going on and instead redoubled her efforts to control every little thing. So her behavior became more dramatic and sometimes downright unreasonable. For example, when it came to preparing the baby's room, she decided that it had to be painted a specific color, nothing else would do. But when we couldn't find that exact shade in the store, she completely lost control. She started crying, screaming, and creating a scene right there in public. Watching a small child throw a tantrum, I felt embarrassed, frustrated, and unsure how to calm her down. Another time we went to eat at a restaurant and it turned into a nightmare. Zoe had this long list of specific demands about her food. What ingredients could and couldn't be used, how the food had to be prepared, even what cutlery should touch her plate. She even told the staff that she was allergic to certain ingredients, which I knew for a fact wasn't true. When the food finally arrived, She didn't like the taste and actually threatened to sue the restaurant for not meeting her standards. I was mortified. After that, I stopped taking her to restaurants and ordered takeaway instead. During her pregnancy, I was also responsible for shopping, as Zoe felt that she shouldn't have to do that. I would usually receive a list from her every weekend, go to the shop and stock our pantry with everything she had asked for. It seemed simple enough, but of course it wasn't. In the middle of the week, Zoe would randomly call me when I was still at work and demand that I go and get a specific item that she had suddenly craved. These were often items that she hadn't included on her shopping list. If I couldn't leave work immediately and get the item to her right away, she would get upset and accuse me of not caring about her needs. Keep in mind that her cravings were relentless, no matter how much effort I put into keeping the house fully stocked. It was never enough for her. There was always something missing, something new she wanted, and it always had to be. It always had to be handled immediately. By the time those 9 months were over, I was completely exhausted. I felt like I was living with a completely different person. Zoe's stress, fears, and controlling behavior were overshadowing what should have been one of the happiest times of our lives. I felt like the pregnancy was consuming not only her but our whole relationship. Every day, despite how exhausting everything was, I tried to keep my mouth shut and simply do what Zoe wanted me to do. I kept telling myself that she was only acting this way because of the pregnancy. I thought that the stress, the hormones, and the anxiety were making her behave this way, and that after the pregnancy she would return to normal. So I gritted my teeth and did everything I could to keep her happy. However, from the moment Jason was born, something felt strange about Zoe. The first time the nurse tried to put him in her arms, she turned away and refused to hold him. At first I didn't think anything of it. She had just gone through childbirth and I assumed she was probably exhausted and overwhelmed. I told myself it was normal for new mothers to need a little time to recover before bonding with their baby. I let her rest, assuming that after a good sleep she would feel more like herself, but that didn't happen. Every time the nurses brought Jason to her, she had this disgusted look as if she couldn't bear to be near him. It was heartbreaking to see. I tried to be patient, thinking maybe it was just hormones or the stress of giving birth, but deep down, I started to worry. When we brought Jason home, things didn't get any better. She wouldn't hold him, wouldn't cuddle him, wouldn't even give him a simple kiss. She remained distant, almost as if he weren't there. It was hard to watch. But I didn't have much time to reflect on it. Fortunately, I had taken a few weeks off work to help look after the baby, so I took on most of the responsibilities. I was the one who changed diapers, held him when he cried, and cuddled him during those quiet moments when he just wanted to be close to someone. Feeding him was another battle. She didn't want to breastfeed, and it took a lot of persuasion on my part for her to even try. When she finally agreed, it was clear that she was doing it reluctantly and showed no warmth or affection during those moments. I was desperate. I didn't understand why she was acting like that. He wanted to believe that she would eventually bond with Jason, that she was just taking a little longer to adjust to motherhood. But the more time passed, the more he felt that she had no intention of connecting with him. When my paternity leave ended and it was time to return to work, the situation came to a head. Zoe completely broke down, saying that she was not capable enough to look after Jason on her own. She insisted that she couldn't handle it. I didn't know what else to do, so I called my mom and asked for her help. Fortunately, my mom started coming to our house to help Zoe look after Jason while I was at work. It gave me some peace of mind to know that at least someone was there to make sure Jason was being taken care of. My mom was a lifesaver during that time, stepping in where Zoe wouldn't. But even with my mom's help, one thing was painfully obvious: Zoe was completely detached from our son. She acted as if he wasn't her child, as if he was just a responsibility in which she had no interest. It wasn't just me who noticed it. My mom saw it too. We both became increasingly concerned about Zoe's behavior. She was clearly going through some mental issues and we wanted to get her the right help. We encouraged her to talk to someone, to open up about how she was feeling and maybe get some professional help. We thought that if she could express what was going on inside her, it might help her get through it and connect with Jason. But getting Zoe to agree to that was another battle altogether. She flatly refused to acknowledge that anything was wrong. Instead of going to therapy or even talking to someone about how she was feeling, she started spending her nights out with her single friends. It wasn't just the occasional dinner or a night out. She would stay out all night and come home completely drunk. Sometimes she could barely stand up. When I tried to talk to her about it and tried to ask her why she was behaving like that, she would lash out at me. She would shout things at me like, "I've done my bit. I gave birth to him and now it's your turn to raise him." Hearing her say that broke something inside me. It wasn't just the words. It was the coldness behind them, the way she dismissed me and Jason as if we didn't matter. Since she clearly wasn't interested in being a stay-at-home mom, I thought that maybe going back to work would give her a sense of purpose again. I was barely keeping things together financially on my income alone, and I hoped that making it easier for her to return to work would not only help us financially, but also give her a new routine to focus on. But Zoe had no interest in that either. When I mentioned it, she mocked me, saying that I wasn't man enough to take care of her and Jason on my income. She told me that I needed to get my act together and get a better job so that she wouldn't have to work at all. I couldn't believe how unreasonable she was being. I tried to explain how I was already doing everything I could, working full-time, looking after Jason and running the household. I pointed out that she wasn't contributing in any way, either as a mother or as a partner. But nothing I said seemed to matter. Zoe wasn't interested in helping. She wasn't interested in Jason, in me, or even in finding her own way forward. This went on for a whole year of juggling everything, work, parenting, and the house, while Zoe spent her days without any sense of purpose. She spent her nights with friends and her days either sleeping to recover from hangovers or scrolling on her phone. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. Every day I felt like I was functioning on fumes, doing everything I could to keep our lives afloat while she did nothing to help. I remember one night in particular that stuck with me. I had just come home from work after another long, exhausting day. Jason was already asleep, thanks to my mom, who had stepped in once again to help me. Instead of going straight in, I sat in the parking garage of our house, and for the first time in a long time, I broke down. I sat there crying in my car, feeling completely overwhelmed by the weight of it all. I felt so tired. Tired of being the only adult in our relationship. Tired of shouldering the burden of everything while Zoe lived as if she had no responsibilities. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over again. Why wasn't she happy? Why wasn't she looking after Jason? Why did she seem to enjoy being with her friends more than she did with us? The part that hurt the most was the betrayal of it all. Zoe was the one who had wanted a baby so much. She was the one who had become obsessed with getting pregnant, the one who had put us both through the emotional ringer just to make it happen. And now she was acting like Jason wasn't even her son, like none of this was what she wanted. I couldn't understand it. And the harder I tried, the more lost I felt. After that, I spoke to my mom, and that same weekend, after dropping Jason off at her place, I went back home to have a long overdue conversation with Zoe. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I laid it all out, my feelings, my frustrations, my exhaustion. I told her how much I was struggling and how much I needed her support and how I couldn't keep carrying the weight of our family on my own. I thought that if I was honest and vulnerable, maybe she would finally understand. Maybe she would see how much her behavior was hurting not only me, but also our son. But instead of compassion or even acknowledgement, Zoe laughed. She laughed right in my face. I will never forget that moment. It was as if she wasn't even listening to me, as if everything I said was just a big joke to her. She told me I was being a coward and making a big deal out of nothing. Then she launched into a tirade about how thousands of women would be housewives and how I should be grateful for the life I had with her. I tried to reason with her, explaining that most housewives actually contribute. They look after the home, they raise their children, and they support their families in meaningful ways. Zoe was doing none of that. She wasn't contributing to the household, she wasn't helping to raise Jason, and she was spending our money on shopping and alcohol. But no matter how I tried to put it, she refused to see my point. Zoe argued that I was being unreasonable to complain and that she liked the way things were. She even suggested that I could get a part-time job at the weekends if I was so worried about the finances. I couldn't believe her nerve. She then insisted that I should calm down and stop overthinking, insisting that many of her friends lived the same way as her. Hearing those words, her complete disregard for my feelings and her refusal to take any responsibility pushed me over the edge. I felt a wave of anger that I hadn't allowed myself to feel until that moment. I told her clearly that I didn't care if her friends were lazy and lived off their husbands. Maybe her husbands were okay with it, but I wasn't. I told her that if this was the kind of life she wanted, a life of doing nothing, contributing nothing, and treating our marriage as a one-sided transaction, then she could no longer have my free lunch. I told her as clearly as I could that she had ceased to be my partner a long time ago. She no longer contributed to my life in any meaningful way. And if this was how she wanted to live, then I didn't want to be part of it. I told her to pack her bags and leave because I wanted a divorce. Zoe was completely taken aback. She acted as if I was crazy for even suggesting it, as if I was the one in the wrong for standing up for myself. What followed was one of the worst fights we ever had. She screamed at me, screamed so loud that the neighbors could probably hear, and she started breaking things around the house. She even went out and scratched my car in a fit of rage. It was chaos. But I stood my ground. I refused to give in. In the end, she packed her things and left. After she moved out, however, I started hearing from her friends and family. They called me all sorts of names: an asshole, a bad husband, an ungrateful man. They couldn't understand why I would file for divorce. They only heard Zoe's side of the story, and none of them bothered to ask me how difficult it had been to live with her. Zoe even sent me text messages during those days after our initial separation and talked about how happy she was that we were no longer together and how she was going to be able to enjoy her single life to the full and find her true self. When the divorce proceedings began, I knew that the custody battle was going to be the hardest part. Zoe, despite everything, decided to fight tooth and nail to take Jason away from me. But I was prepared. I had gathered enough evidence to prove her irresponsibility and lack of involvement as a mother. I presented to the court countless cases of her refusal to care for Jason, her all-night parties, her behavior during the pregnancy, and her subsequent negligence. Fortunately, the judge saw through her performance. They could see the reality of the situation and, in the end, I was granted full custody of Jason. Zoe was given supervised visiting rights and was also ordered to pay child support. That decision brought me immense relief because I knew that Jason's well-being was no longer at risk. Zoe, of course, was furious with the outcome. She tried to argue that she was unemployed and could not afford child support, claiming that she could not find a job. But that was just another one of her lies. The court didn't believe her and ordered her to find a job quickly and start contributing financially to Jason's upbringing. Anyway, it's been 8 months since the divorce was finalized, and in all that time Zoe hasn't contacted me, not once. She hasn't called to ask about Jason, hasn't asked about his well-being, and hasn't tried to visit him. It's as if she had completely erased him and me from her life. But then, out of the blue, she called me yesterday. I was surprised to see her name appear on my phone. When I answered, it was clear she was drunk. She was calling me from her sister's wedding. She was slurring her words and barely coherent. She began to ramble, telling me how much she regretted divorcing me. She admitted that she had not been able to find anyone better than me despite trying. She went on to share how she had met more than 18 men on dating apps after our divorce, but that none of them were good enough for her. She said how she had made it clear to all of them that she wanted to be a housewife without children, but that none of them had agreed to meet her demands. She went on to complain about how there were no real men left in the world who could provide her with the lifestyle she expected. She kept insisting that she was willing to forgive me and start over if I agreed to put our past behind us. I made it very clear that I had no interest in rekindling anything with her. That chapter is closed. It was late at night, so I ended the call without talking to her any further. When I woke up today, there were multiple missed calls and text messages from her. She thinks I was rude and inconsiderate for not even giving her a chance. She believes I am being selfish as a father and insists that for the sake of our son I should consider taking her back so we can be a complete family again. Saida, if I don't even consider this? Update 1 for all those who are asking: not only has my ex-wife not contacted me for months, she has not asked about our son at all. Since our divorce, she has not visited him once, and it seems that she has completely forgotten about him. She has not asked about him or made any effort to see him, and, on top of that, she has never paid any child support. I could take her back to court and make her pay, but I haven't because, honestly, after leaving her, I feel like a weight has been lifted. I can finally breathe and be the kind of father my son needs. I can spend more quality time with him, and I am very grateful for my mom's support through all of this. I didn't want any involvement with my ex-wife, which is why I haven't been in touch with her until now. Update 2: It's been a week since my last update, and today my ex-wife Zoe unexpectedly turned up at my house. I had been avoiding her calls and texts since she drunk dialed me from her sister's wedding. I thought that if I ignored her, she would eventually calm down and move on. Clearly that didn't happen. The moment I opened the door, she demanded to know why I hadn't been responding to her attempts to contact me. She seemed frustrated and impatient, her tone making it clear that she wasn't there for a casual conversation. I kept my composure and told her directly that I wasn't interested in talking to her. I didn't beat around the bush. I told her that I didn't care about her supposed change of heart and that I wasn't interested in rekindling anything with her. Zoe then brought up Jason. It was the first time in months that she had even mentioned him. She started asking questions about him, how he was, what he was like, how he was adjusting to life. When she demanded to see him, I was taken aback. I pointed out how she had made no effort to see Jason or even ask about him all this time. I reminded her how she had completely distanced herself from him and had never bothered to communicate, but Zoe argued that she was still Jason's mother and that I had no right to stop her seeing him now. She claimed to have learned from her mistakes and insisted that she was a changed person now. She said she wanted to make more of an effort to be part of Jason's life and that she was ready to make amends for the time she had missed. I told her that I needed time to think things over. I explained that this was not a decision to be taken lightly and that she couldn't expect to simply re-enter Jason's life as if nothing had happened. I asked her to leave and promised to call her in a few days to set a date for her to visit Jason if she decided it was the right thing to do. As much as I want her to simply stay out of our lives completely, I know deep down that Jason has the right to a relationship with his mother. If she is genuinely committed to trying, I don't want to deprive him of that opportunity. But I also need to protect him from any unnecessary distress or instability. And I'm not convinced that Zoe is really ready to be the father Jason deserves. I'm honestly in a bind. Update 3. It's been 4 months since my last update. For the last 2 months I've allowed my ex-wife Zoe to visit and spend time with our son Jason. I was hoping she was genuine about wanting to repair their relationship and be a better mother. At first, I noticed some positive changes in her behavior. She seemed more attentive to Jason, and I cautiously thought she might be turning a corner. However, every time Zoe took Jason out to spend time with him, she sent me a detailed list of her expenses. I'm talking about everything: the food he ate, any small gifts I bought him, and even the clothes I decided to buy him. She wasn't sharing these details for the sake of transparency. She actually expected me to reimburse her for every penny she spent while spending time with her own son. The audacity of it all left me speechless. I mean, I'm already the one raising Jason full-time. I take care of all his needs: food, clothing, school supplies, medical expenses, and more. On top of that, Zoe hasn't paid me a single cent of the child support she is legally required to contribute. Yet here she was, expecting me to pay her for the privilege of spending time with our son. At first I tried to ignore her ridiculous demands, simply refusing to pay. I thought she would eventually realize how absurd her expectations were, but she didn't. She kept sending me these bills after each visit as if I were doing her a favor by looking after her own child. The situation came to a head this week when Zoe asked to take Jason to a family event. I agreed, wanting to give her another chance to bond with him. When she brought him back later that day, she handed me another detailed list of her expenses and expected me to pay her. This time I didn't hold back. I laughed in her face and told her there was absolutely no way I was giving her a single cent. She threatened to stop visiting Jason altogether, as if his presence in her life was some kind of favor she was doing me. At that point, I had had enough. I told her clearly that if she didn't want to see Jason, that was her choice. I wasn't going to beg her to be in his life. She was the one who said she wanted to repair her relationship with him, but I also made it perfectly clear that this time I wouldn't hesitate to take her to court and make her pay all the back child support she owed me. Zoe's eyes widened and she argued that it was unfair because I was more financially stable than she was. She claimed that the courts were wrong to ask her to pay in the first place and that, as a woman, she should not be expected to cover any expenses for our son. Honestly, I have had enough of her ridiculous behavior. She is clearly taking both me and our son for granted. What kind of parent demands compensation for spending time with their own child? She acts more like a babysitter than a mother, and I've had enough. Now I'm going to make her pay, literally. Update 4. It's been 3 months since my last update, and for anyone still waiting for an update, the court has ordered Zoe to pay all the back child support she owed. This time the court has made it very clear that she is legally responsible for financially supporting our son as well. And any further attempts to evade her obligations would not be tolerated. Zoe fought me every step of the way, arguing that the financial burden was unfair and that I should take full responsibility for supporting Jason. She tried to play the victim as usual, and since the court ruling, Zoe has reluctantly started to make the payments, although she still complains about it. She no longer demands money from me after spending time with Jason. Jason, on the other hand, is still happy to spend time with his mother whenever she turns up. I hope Zoe can show up consistently for him at least, because he deserves to have a mother who is present and engaged, not someone who treats their relationship with him as a transactional exchange.